announce the verdict as well.
You've spent time with Crystal Rogers' mother, and I have said this, as both of us are moms, she showed a lot of grace. This has nothing to do with, who thinks they are guilty or not guilty, but being in that position, she has just been so calm and filled with grace, and I don't know how she's been able to do that, but so emotional and wanting this to be done. So now we're done with Crystal Rogers, but what about Tommy Ballard?
Sure.
So now we have to move on to that case, and so now that's going to start. We see Brooks Houck guilty, murder, principal, or accomplice, and also tampering with evidence. This is the verdict that just came down. Joseph Lawson, also found guilty, principal or accomplice, tampering with evidence. This took how long? We found out, I guess, this morning.
4 hours. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, and we were all kind of on standby in the newsroom, just anticipating when that this would happen. But, I think, Dawn, although this is the outcome of the trial that the family and friends of Crystal Rogers have wanted, we still don't know what happened to her. Where is her body? How exactly did she die? We don't know any of that.
Yeah,
and
what
happened? What happened to all of those questions? We were hoping to learn that in this trial, but that is still a massive mystery hanging over our community.
It's a massive mystery, and again, for those who are on the side of the Houcks, they're saying, you can't prove, that they did it. And those who are, with Crystal Rogers' family, they're happy to see this verdict. But again, exactly like you said, there are little pieces for each side, but apparently one stacked up more for Crystal Rogers, and now they too have been found guilty. And we're going to be hearing about this still, I bet, for 10 more years.
Sure.
There's been a lot that has gone on in Bardstown that people are going to be talking about.
Yes, unsolved cases linked to Tommy Ballard, Jason Ellis, the Netherlands. So there's been a lot of unanswered questions in that community for quite some time. Shane Young told the jury in his closing arguments yesterday to folks, use your God-given common sense. And he kind of laid out the gaps in Houck's inconsistent timeline of where he went and who he saw the days after Rogers disappeared. He also kind of described some of the characteristics and actions by Brooks Houck after Crystal vanished as sinister. Folks said that he never lifted a finger in trying to find her, and a lot of people said that that was just odd and suspicious.
Like if your loved one was missing, why wouldn't you search and search and be upset? But you heard the closing arguments of each of them, and I guess you just had to weigh which one seemed more right to you. This now is done, and we have to see what happens. But you had the grandmother's car and the dog that hit on that. You had two experts that looked at the cell evidence, and you just had to weigh that too. There were jurors. There were 15 jurors. They had to take 3 alternates away, and those 12 jurors went in. They did ask questions, and they came back and they wanted to look. They had 2 questions. 2 of the questions they wanted to go back and listen to one of the folks that came in and gave information again. They went back and looked at that person's testimony. And I can't think of what the second question was that.
I don't remember the second question.
Yeah, they had 2 questions. They asked the judge. They went back in, and then within 4 hours, they delivered now, and you see the family there. Some of them crying, some of them hugging. Both suspects found guilty. Brooks Houck, murder, principal or accomplice, tampering with evidence. Again, this taking 10 years. So what happens now is the question, is there a possibility that someone will now lead the family or authorities to Crystal Rogers' body? I'm sure her mom is so happy to have this verdict, but I'm sure she wants to lay her daughter to rest.
And that's the one thing, the last time I spoke with her, is she just wanted a place where she could remember and honor her daughter. I spoke to her a couple of years ago, and she's the type of person who has welcomed people into her home as far as the media. She's talked to us so many times. She's well loved and respected in her community as well. So let's look at the charges against Joseph Lawson, that he was found guilty of conspiracy to murder and tampering with evidence. So as we know, that he worked for Brooks Houck, and his father, as Dawn had mentioned, was found guilty, Steve Lawson, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. So Joseph and his father were facing the same charges. And of course, Brooks, as the prosecution had said, he was the mastermind in all of this. So that's why his charges were different in this case.
The jury came back, I was saying, with a question. One was to get a whiteboard. I don't know what that whiteboard was for, but the jury came in to the judge and said, we need a whiteboard. The other was to replay Charlie Girdley's testimony. They went back in before deliberations. They talked about it 4 hours later. They came back out and found both suspects guilty. Now, you all know that during this entire trial, we were not allowed to take in any cameras, any recording devices. Our reporters have been inside the courtroom writing everything and making sure that you got everything online or through us. Our reporters are still in the courtroom. They're trying to get the information now that you need, and they will be back out to report. Again, our cameras are not allowed anywhere near the courtroom.
And Dawn, when I spoke to Sherry Ballard on the phone right before the trial was going to start, and I said, are you okay with this? And she said, yes, anything that will not jeopardize this case, I want to go along with that. Because we all thought, well, why isn't there more outrage that cameras aren't allowed, that we weren't going to be showing every part of this trial with our cameras being in there. But she said, you know what, I don't want to risk anything. I don't want there to be any problems. I want whatever it takes to get a conviction. So she was okay with that from the get-go.
She has, as I said, she's shown a lot of grace. She's been okay with everything that's supposed to be done. Mm-hmm. Whatever needs to be done, needs to be done. You know, there was trouble with the Houck's family when they bought the recording devices in. That's illegal. You know, you cannot do that. And what she wants, what she has said she wanted done, is for everything to be done legal, because she doesn't want anything to go wrong. She wants the verdict to be the verdict. And now we have it, both suspects found guilty. Our reporters are in here just working as hard as they can. They are waiting for them to to just get all of this information in. We had even an artist in there that was trying to draw everything, and they can't do that right now, but they are sitting there trying to get this information. None of this took as long as we thought. In order to pick the jury, that really didn't take any time. They moved this case to Bowling Green in order to do that, and that was for both cases.
Sure.
For Brooks Houck and also Joseph Lawson, and for Steve Lawson. In order to pick the jury, we were amazed at how short of a time that was, and in order to get the verdicts for both cases.
There was a lot of question in this subdivision, what folks are looking at in this video, where Brooks Houck had constructed homes. You know, for quite some time, we saw the FBI digging up concrete and trying to uncover any type of evidence. And that had gone on for so long. So many eyes were on this case. Dawn, as you mentioned, podcasts, documentaries, you know, they've been on shows as well. It's just been one that has been a mystery, has been troublesome for folks. Sherry has always maintained, when they figure out what happens to Crystal, they'll figure out what happened to Tommy. As we know, just months after he was looking into Crystal's death, he was at it, just like any father would do. He was so dedicated to getting answers to this
Myra,
case.
I hear you say just like any father would do.
I think he went above and beyond.
Yes, because he had a box
Yes.
of things where he had pictures and recordings and papers. On one of the documentaries that I saw, and one of the investigators said, I have never seen anything like this in my life.
Sure. He was digging hard.
He was digging hard.
And Tommy's father, Till, had said he was getting too close. He knew
he was
something.
getting too close.
And that is why that day he was out hunting with his grandson on their family property, that he was shot and killed. It wasn't a hunting accident. They knew that right away.
And again, we don't know this. This is what we're hearing. But here we go. That case has not even started yet. And that case has to start. So what's going to happen when that case starts? Our reporters, again, are there. They can't have any recording devices. They weren't expecting the break that they're in right now. The verdict was given. They had to take a break. They're telling us they were supposed to go immediately into sentencing.
Okay.
And that hasn't happened yet. So they're waiting to be called back into the courtroom to go right back into sentencing. They don't know the plan right now, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on. We're waiting for that, but we do know that it's over. Both suspects found guilty. Brooks Houck, murder, principal or accomplice, tampering with evidence. That is the verdict. Joseph Lawson, also found guilty. So this part of it is done. All we need to do now is find out what the sentence is going to be.
Yes, and Joseph was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and tampering with physical evidence. And you know what? What's interesting, Dawn, is that the jury that was listening into this trial, they were not allowed to know Steve Lawson's involvement in this and the verdict that came down with his involvement in this. So that has been something that they did not know about. They were not allowed to know. So I'm sure that they'll come to learn some of this. We are waiting and hoping that Crystal's family, loved ones, will speak to us after this. But as you can imagine,
that would
just
be hard.
So hard,
yeah.
So incredibly hard. And you know, we've been talking about this. I can't imagine losing a child and then you lose your partner as well. They were high school sweethearts, Tommy and Sherry. They were always together, even in the searches for Crystal. When you look up our video on searches for Crystal Rogers, you see Tommy and Sherry side by side. And when she said that he died, it was a piece of her that was gone. But she knew that she had to keep fighting for justice for her daughter and now for her husband as well. So I know that that will probably be the next thing that her focus goes on. And Dawn, you and I were just talking about this. Till, who is Tommy's father, Crystal's grandfather, I was just hoping personally, because I've been talking to him so much over the years, that a verdict would come in his life.
In his lifetime.
Yes.
Because can you imagine that you've been waiting and your heart is broken and you need this information and you don't get it? And then to listen to Crystal's mother and to lose Tommy, she had said, Tommy was the only thing that was holding me up through this because I don't know what happened to my daughter.
Yeah.
And then he was murdered. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Now, she has. And like I said, I don't know any other way to say it other than to say she's done it with grace. I don't know any other way to say it.
And with the love and support of her Bardstown community.
Yes.
When you drive through Bardstown, you see the prayers for Crystal Rogers, the signs, the billboards. This was a community that had the Ballards back. Literally, they were there through the vigils, through the searches, through seeing her children. Think about it. Crystal has 5 kids who have gone 10 years without their mother, and supporting those children as well.
I mean, think of how much they've grown. I saw a post by Sherry. She was getting her nails done.
Yes, I saw
know
that
you
too.
saw that. And she was tired. She wanted to do something for herself, get her nails done. She did that. She went to pay, and when she went to the cash register, they said to her, somebody's taken care of this for you already, Mrs. Ballard. And she said, no, I haven't paid. And they said, no, somebody's taken care of everything for you. We just want to know we're thinking of you. And she said she was so tired and felt like everything was, that she lost it.
Yeah.
You know, and she hadn't done that. She just lost it.
Yeah, she was wearing green today for Tommy in support of him, pink for Crystal. We do have some new video that's coming into our newsroom of folks hugging there after the verdict came in. Again, if you're just joining us now, Brooks Houck was found guilty of murder, principal or accomplice, and tampering with physical evidence. You can see lots of hugs, lots of tears, so much emotion coming from that Warren County courthouse today. Joseph Lawson was also found guilty of conspiracy to murder and tampering with physical evidence. Till is, I think, right there in that blue shirt there in that corner. We've been referencing him several times. He's there right now, of course, wiping tears away from his
tears.
Yeah, and seeing all the folks. We are just waiting for. Also, Leland Hulbert has been giving us insight throughout this trial and talking to us, breaking down the trial, the evidence. Now he's going to be talking to us about what the jury decided. So he's going to be joining us here in a second.
Come on in, Leland.
Come on in, Leland. Let's talk to you about the verdict that was decided. I know that we had mentioned, Leland, yesterday that a quick decision by the jury would indicate one thing. I know you're just walking into our studio.
We're telling him, come on in, quick here. We need to know some things.
Tell us about your thoughts to the jury's decision today.
So I think this one, I was talking to someone else about, and I thought it was kind of a coin flip. I didn't think it was a slam dunk either way. I thought that the jury could potentially find lessers, a facilitation for Joseph or nothing for Joseph, or perhaps a guilty or not guilty for Brooks. But it's pretty emphatic, I think, that they were guilty basically on all the maximum counts, and their length of time before they returned a verdict was relatively short. I thought they might be deliberating for 2 or 3 days, but it seems like the question they asked really focused on that witness. So the whole prosecution theme was not the car and, you know, where it was on the parkway, as the defense was trying to say. I think the theme was Brooks Houck's story. Was he lying? Was his timeline good or not? And when they called that and watched that witness testimony again, it had to do with his timeline and where was the car, who called Joseph Lawson, how was Stephen Lawson involved. So the jury has spoken. They seem to believe the timeline of the prosecution and that Brooks Houck was lying.
So you said they've got him guilty on all of the maximum charges.
Right.
What could the sentence be, which is what we're waiting for?
So the sentence, from what I'm seeing, it could be, on the murder case, it could be up to life for Brooks, and then for Joseph Lawson, it's conspiracy, so it's a Class B. So that could be 20 years, plus I think he may have been found guilty of another count,
tampering,
which could be another 5 years. So he could be looking at up to 20 or 25, and then Brooks could be looking at up to life.
Can we bring up the charges on Brooks again on that full screen? Because, Leland, I want you to kind of break it down for our viewers, the difference between the murder, right there, the principal or accomplice. What does that mean?
So that's just basically an either or. It doesn't lower the penalty range whether he's an accomplice or he's the principal. It's just a complicity theory. And complicity casts a wide net over everyone that was actually involved in the murder. Whereas conspiracy, you basically have to be involved in a meeting to decide to murder someone. It's sort of a legal crossroads of two charges, but the complicity is more powerful, higher range of penalty, and it basically, what we would always tell people is complicity is like the charge itself, even though it's attached with complicity, because the penalty is the same.
Okay.
Are we done with all of this? Could there be more people charged in the death of Crystal Rogers, or do you think we are done?
I think you're going to see an appeal. I mean, Brooks Houck, from what I understand, has financial resources and family resources. So anytime you lose a jury trial, there's always 10 to 50 issues that could be appealed. Now, whether or not any of them are palpable or whether or not they'll go anywhere, we'll see. But I would strongly suspect an appeal. And the only way they wouldn't is if you say, all right, we waive our right to an appeal and take this number or something like that. They can still negotiate with the prosecutor before the jury gets to sentence. But I don't anticipate that'll happen. That's pretty rare.
So during the trial, we learned that Rosemary Houck, the mother of Brooks Houck, and Nick Houck, the brother, who is also a former Bardstown police officer, Nick Houck, they were still considered co-conspirators. So what do you think that's going to happen with that? So the state thinks that they were involved somehow.
And I know that I've asked you that question about 10 times now, because co-conspirators, like, that seems like that would mean something.
I think what it means is they could have been charged, but the prosecution has basically hit a home run with 3 now defendants. Will they continue to go after other people? I would doubt it, because they've already, if Brooks Houck is truly the principal actor and he had the relationship with Crystal and he set all of this up, going after his family member is something that could be done, but I wouldn't anticipate it to be done because you already have the 3 quote-unquote main actors. And, there could be other reasons they're not going after them. Maybe there wasn't enough evidence. Maybe they were only tangentially linked, but, they were used to pile up the circumstantial evidence against Brooks Houck, because there wasn't much physical evidence, but when you have 10 pieces of circumstantial evidence that show that either he was lying or his story was wrong or that he was with Crystal that day, which I don't think anyone denies, and then the oddities of him recording a statement and writing out a statement, I think all of that sounds great if you're trying to hide a crime, but it can unravel the moment the jury thinks anything you've said is wrong, because it was kind of to my opinion, it was kind of a control freak mechanism by Brooks to write out a statement while he's in there and then give it. And so he was trying to control the narrative, and presumably if he killed Crystal, he's trying to control everything, hide everything. And that can only work if the jury believes you 100%, and clearly they did not.
In this case, we had no body, no weapon, no crime scene, but still the state was able to prove their case to that jury. That speaks volumes.
Right. I think the prosecution did an excellent job. And I think from what I can tell, the defense did a good job as well. It's not really about winning and losing, although that's the way it'll be characterized. It's more about putting on your best evidence and then the defense putting on your best witnesses. And they tried to pay experts, spend a ton of money on experts. And it kind of shows you can't necessarily buy your way out of a trial if you have, a solid prosecution case.
We've got Tommy Ballard still. Is that going to be connected to this, or is it going to be like Steve Lawson? You can't talk about any of this. Do you have any idea how that might go?
There's a lot of things that could happen, and speculation after something, sort of monumental like this, it's kind of difficult to say. I mean, Brooks Houck could now talk to the police and give a different story if he was reduced some number of years, or, and a lot of times you see this on TV, but the family still wants to know where the body is. Yeah. They still want to know what happened. And if Brooks Houck is appealing his case, he's not going to say anything. And so people can still talk. People can maybe feel a sense of relief if they were trying to hide from Brooks or felt pressure from Brooks. And now that he's been found guilty, if his appeal is unsuccessful, if he ends up going to prison for an extended period of time, maybe you'll hear more people come forward. Maybe they were afraid, but that's really just speculation.
So right now, we're kind of in that penalty phase, right? So the jury made their decision. Walk us through what's happening right now in the courthouse, what the judge and the jury are deciding. So
the judge the penalty phase is like a mini trial, and each side can call witnesses. You can have mitigation witnesses from the family. You can have Brooks Houck's family saying he's a great father, he's this, he's that, he's done wonderful things. Joseph Lawson can mitigate the fact that he has a lower intelligence or has physical ailments or things, alcoholism, things like that.
Does that make their time lower?
Well, no, it's just something that they're allowed to put forward. And the prosecution will likely put forward a probation officer that talks about, probation eligibility, which there's not going to be any in this case, or other terms, the crimes and the penalties. And then the jury will be given another set of instructions. Now that you've found this guilty, you'd set the range between 20 years and life. And what number do you want? And then the judge will determine if they want to follow the jury's recommendation, which they do 98% of the time. So I don't know when we'll actually have a number back, but I think it was telling in the first trial. When the number goes higher, that usually tells me the jury is more on the prosecution's side, or they strongly believed the prosecution, or they were offended by the crime. So if Brooks Houck gets 40, 50 years, I don't think they believe much of what the defense was selling.
Will that number come back today?
It did in the first trial.
Okay.
So my guess is the way everything else has gone is pretty quickly. So I can't imagine the judge dismissing them and bringing them back tomorrow. They're all there. It's only, whatever, it's 1/3, 2/3.
214.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Bowling Green, it's 1:14. So they still have 3-4 hours of a normal day. So I would suspect the judge will send them back after they hear their little parts from each defense attorney and the prosecution. Everyone will, the prosecution will likely make a recommendation of a term. They usually recommend closer to the max if they have reasons to. And then the defense will say, we understand, we appreciate your verdict. We believe it should just be 20 years, the minimum, because this case had it was so close, And so they'll land somewhere, lower or higher, and that'll usually tell you how strong the jury felt about the case.
Okay. Again, if you're just joining us, Brooks Houck and Joseph Lawson were found guilty today. We want to head over now to Jose Zozaya, who is in Bowling Green with us, getting a reaction from folks there. Jose, what's the feel there?
Well, Myra, if you saw those images from earlier with particularly members of Crystal Rogers' family, and obviously they were quite easy to tell based on the color clothes they were wearing, just a prevailing sense of relief. If you remember just scanning through some of those immediate reaction videos we sent you the moments after they'd learned the jury's verdict, it was just relief, a lot of sobbing, embracing each other, hugging. We actually even saw, members outside of that inner circle of the family sort of approaching others to offer, their words of comfort, you could say. Of course, now the moment we're waiting for as we're sitting here, and as, of course, Leland mentioned, it is 1:15 Bowling Green time, Central Time. The room behind me is the courtroom where, of course, we saw all of that crowd step right back inside. That is Circuit Courtroom D, all the way down the end of the hallway. Now, what's interesting there, Myra and Dawn, is that once we see the crowd kind of leave this particular room, of course, assuming the jury comes back with its decision on a sentence for both Brooks Houck and Joseph Lawson, 2 floors below us, there's been an area set where we believe we'll be able to talk to prosecutor Shane Young, perhaps, ask him questions about what they believe might have, convinced the jury as far as their explanation in the case for the verdict that they rendered. From then on, as the afternoon progresses, we're hoping to then step outside, see what kind of groups or crowds gather from the outside. And worth noting as well, Myra and Dawn, that at this time there have been several deputies, and we heard this in conversation with the extra personnel we had here on the premises, is that barring any sort of, friction or confrontation, they're just bolstering a little bit more with security to have deputies. Obviously, 2 very, different perspectives and sides for those supporting Crystal Rogers and for those perhaps supporting Joseph Lawson and Brooks Houck. But we just know that has been an extra layer of precaution that we noticed as soon as we walked into the Warren County Justice Center this morning. So just a little bit of perspective for you all as we're now waiting to see what happens inside. I believe who we have is Alina Noakes, my colleague Alina Noakes, who will be filtering those notes as we wait to now see what the sentencing part of today's decision is going to be. Myra, Dawn.
Right. Jose, did it surprise you that they took that extra bit of caution? I know you all sent that message that, okay, they're changing things because they're taking an extra bit of caution. And at first I thought, well, wait a minute, what's going on? Did something happen? Do you know, or did they just decide to do that?
Well, Dawn, I believe that was just a decision that, the powers that be within the courthouse, they just wanted to be as proactive as possible. Nothing that myself, Alina, or any of our crews noticed as far as, a very tense confrontation between those supporting on the prosecutor side and those supporting on the defense side. It just feels like with the history of this particular case, and again, for the context, we're talking 10 years pretty much since Crystal Rogers was first reported missing. Likely, these animosities have not really dwindled. And so just on the chance that some of that was going to play out, we saw, different levels of bailiffs and deputies. In fact, we even saw, kind of the same level of security when earlier this morning we saw the bailiffs escorting the alternate jurors, those 2 men and 1 woman, back to their cars. Just wanted to make sure anyone who's involved in the sort of, the important process not to be, tempted or sort of interfered with in any way, just wanting to establish that perimeter, that bubble for those people who are involved in this trial process. And perhaps to your point as well, Dawn, that we've sort of seen phases where deputies have kind of taken different groups out at several times so that they're not necessarily commingling with each other, because of course the afternoon is still young, so we'll have to wait and see ultimately what plays out and how this crowd is going to react to the sentencing we're about to hear at some point later today.
Jose, can you tell us from what you saw in the courtroom when the guilty verdict came down, what was the reaction by Crystal Rogers supporters, and then what was the reaction by Brooks Houck's family?
So, Myra, to answer your question, so where I was helping part of our team set up that staging area where we presume the attorneys might come and talk to us. So that this might have been a select area for Shane Young or Brian Butler or Robert Boyd to come talk to us after the fact, after all business is settled with obviously the verdict and the sentencing today. For that, I'm hoping to bring you Alina once she comes in, because she was the one inside of the courtroom to have heard either what I presume is that audible sigh of relief and crying, weeping on the side of the courtroom that was supporting Crystal Rogers. As for those who might have been in there to support Joseph Lawson or Brooks Houck, I can't comment on that directly just because I wasn't there to witness the immediate gut reaction. So, but once that happens, I'm for sure Alina will share what that immediate impression was she had.
I think for this case, Dawn and Leland and Jose, we've had this live blog going on. Our reporters in the courtroom handwrite the notes. It comes into our newsroom. We put it up on the blog immediately. Our viewers have been paying attention to every detail of this case. I can tell you, I was over the weekend, people knew everything about the hogs, the teeth, the details about what was found at the underneath the concrete. Folks were really dialed into this case and wanting to know every detail about it.
The details, so there's so many details. Leland Holbert is also with us. There's so many details, Myra, even for us, and we're sitting at our desk reading everything probably about 42 times. I had mentioned this to you. That's a lot for a juror to take in every day. For me, it would be emotional, so I may not ever be a good juror. Do they get to take notes or anything like that? They did call, they did come back into the judge and say, we need to hear this one more time. What are they allowed to do, like Myra said, in order to keep all that information?
So typically they'll be handed a notepad at the beginning of trial and some pencils or pens, and they take their own notes, and they can take those back with them to deliberate, as well as requesting other, they will get all the physical evidence and take that back in the jury room, assuming it's not, contraband or a gun or something like that, unless they need to look at it. And then they can request to see any statements, again, that were taken as testimony or even recorded statements. And here they did request one. And anytime a jury asks a question or requests something during deliberations, it can kind of give you a sign as to where they're headed or what they're thinking. And so this,
as a lawyer, what's that make you feel like?
Well, I mean, these witnesses all cut both ways, because some of them were They changed their stories. Some of them are related to Houck. Some of them, were pro-prosecution theoretically if they were law enforcement, but then you had other testimony from hired experts from the defense. So the witness they chose to hear from and the short amount of time they watched it made me think they were shoring up Shane Young's argument about timeline. And did Brooks Houck lie in his timeline that he gave to police? And I think the answer is probably yes in the jury's mind, because they found him guilty.
I think for a lot of us, we thought Steve Lawson was kind of the appetizer to the full meal of this whole case. And it did surprise us in Steve Lawson's case, in his trial. He testified in his own defense, which was shocking. We did not see Brooks Houck or Joseph Lawson testify. Do you think that could have helped them?
Well, like I said, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback now that we have a verdict and say, oh, well, maybe Brooks Houck should have testified. And, it clearly backfired for Stephen Lawson, but they also played jail calls. So the jury heard Stephen Lawson lying or admitting to involvement, so they probably thought he had to clear that up. Here, it was a little bit different. So since you have nothing to lose, since you've already lost, should he have testified? Maybe, but I would say 9 out of 10 defense attorneys would have recommended he not. So the fact that you rarely see a defendant testify, especially in a high-profile case, if the defendant wants to, it's ultimately their decision, but he's got good lawyers, he's paying them well, he's getting their advice, and obviously their advice was that he not testify.
So Brooks and Joseph have been obviously in custody all this time. What kind of happens, after sentencing? Where do they go back to where they were in jail, or do they go to a different facility usually? So
once you're officially sentenced, you're punted over to the Department of Corrections. So the judge doesn't really have a say where they go, the defense attorneys don't have a say where they go, and the defendants don't really have a say. And it depends on the level of conviction, so they'll probably likely go to a maximum security type facility. There's a few of those in Kentucky, and they could spend some time in a jail before they're transferred, but it's all up to the Department of Corrections.
You mentioned he'll probably appeal. Is the appeal much like or exactly the same as the trial he just went through?
Well, typically a notice of appeal would have to be filed in either 10 to 30 days, and that's fairly soon. And so they have to get all their ducks in a row about the issues they're appealing. But as far as the argument, it's not in front of a jury. It's in front of a 3-panel court of appeals if they decide to hear the arguments. And then, of course, they can always appeal that ruling to the Supreme Court if they think that errors were made. And, I've seen trials that were presumably perfect that had issues with appeal, because when you have multiple witnesses, sketchy evidence, 10 years old things, and other statements, there are going to be some holes. So I'm sure they will have things they can appeal. Will the appeal be successful? Nobody knows.
I was going to ask you, what did you see that could be appealed?
I think that the introduction of statements of other witnesses, they divided the defendants. Those objections where I'm just reading in the notes where it says they go to the bench and talk to the judge. Well, those are typically hot button issues, and the judge will say, no, you can't talk about that anymore. And if the judge stopped for the defense from arguing a point that they should have been able to, that could be appealable. If the judge allowed the prosecution to get into an area that the jury shouldn't have heard, that could be appealable. So there's many issues that are ripe for appeal, but if you're looking for numbers, I would say, 10% of cases that get appealed get overturned. Because there's major error, and then there's minor error that can be like, okay, so the appeals court can say the prosecution maybe didn't do this perfectly, but it's not enough to overturn the jury's verdict. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a long shot, but it's a difficult road to get a case completely overturned.
Mm-hmm. All right, this has been quite the busy day, fast-moving day. Of course, that jury came back with that verdict very quickly today. It just took them 4 hours to make a decision in finding Joseph Lawson and Brooks Houck guilty on the charges that they're facing. So a lot to unpack and a lot to digest and process, and we're waiting for our reporters who are in the courthouse to kind of figure out, as far as the penalty phase of this trial, how much time that the the two will be facing.
Yes, we certainly are not done. We're going to continue to follow this. Again, you can go to wave3.com, continue to follow the blog. Stay with us because we will have the sentencing and everything else you need to know. Again, Brooks, Houck, and Joseph Lawson found guilty. Wave News at 3 will be coming up. Stay with us.